Revelation 14, verses 14 through 20, describes a vivid vision of harvest and judgment. 4 more angels appear with specific jobs to do. It's the final judgment, where the earth is reaped and the clusters of the vine are cast into the great winepress of the wrath of God. Is this vision for the whole earth at the end of all time? Let's find out.
We've come to a point in the chapter where we're kind of at a midway point, where we've looked at these 3 angels. These 3 angels have been proclamation angels. They've proclaimed the everlasting gospel as angel 1. Angel 2 was proclaiming that Babylon, in other words, Jerusalem, is going to fall. And then we talked about the third one. There's a warning. There's a warning given. It is decision time. Decision time. It is upon you. Do you see the amount of the grace of God? I mean, folks, the entire book of Acts, which spans a 40-year period between the ascension of Christ and the destruction of the temple, a 40-year period of the grace of God. Time to get right. This angel, the third angel, is saying there's a 2-edged sword coming. So let's use our hand for a sword. Let's see, I get my hand to where we can all see. Okay, let's have a 2-edged sword. Okay, this is one edge of the gospel. That's angel 1. Angel number 1 was one edge of the gospel, saying that Christ can redeem you. He can redeem you. The other edge of it is there's destruction coming. That's angel 2. Babylon is falling. And angel 3 is bringing these 2 thoughts together, saying, make a decision. So we have the everlasting gospel, angel 1, angel 2, Babylon is falling, and angel 3 is saying, you better choose. Now, we have here, angel number 4 is none other than Jesus Christ. Let's look at verses 14 through 16 together. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, thrust in thy sickle, and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. Now, in verse number 14, we see a callback. If those of you who've been following us, you probably already know what it is. Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. As Jesus, in fact, let me turn there. It's not in our notes, Jimmy, I don't believe, but let me go ahead and turn to Matthew 26. Matthew 26. Because in Daniel chapter 7, remember there's a prophecy where Daniel 7 verses 13 and 14, Daniel is saying, I saw one like unto the Son of Man, and it talks about him being caught up in the clouds to the Ancient of Days. So important. I challenge you to read that and tell me what direction he's going. He's going up with the clouds to the Father in heaven. He's not coming down. This is not a second coming passage. This is a ascension passage in Daniel chapter 7. And you notice he goes to the Father on the clouds, and he's given the kingdoms for his inheritance, and the nations for his inheritance, and a kingdom that has no end. This is the beginning of his kingdom, and it's all the nations. That would be the other half of the coin from Acts chapter 1. And we see the other half here. But remember, before Jesus dies on the cross, and he's having a conversation with Caiaphas, if you remember. And so in verse number 64, remember, Caiaphas is trying to figure out, are you claiming to be king? Now, after they have that little back and forth right there, you look in verse number 64, and Jesus saith unto him, thou hast said, nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see. Now he's talking to Caiaphas. You will see this, Caiaphas. Shall ye see the Son of Man, reference to Daniel 7, that's what I just said, sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Now, those of you who have been following with us since video 1, or if you've been with us, that imagery should just jump off the page. Jesus is using Hebrew biblical knowledge. And what he's saying to Caiaphas is a couple things. He's saying, number 1, I'm the Son of Man from Daniel 7. I'm here to judge you and destroy you. You're asking if I'm king? Let me go a little further. You know the scriptures, Caiaphas. Daniel 7 is me. I'm the Son of Man. And you're going to see in your lifetime, you're going to see that I'm going to be seated at the right hand of the Father. Now, did he say Caiaphas is going to see him in heaven? No. Caiaphas is going to know that Jesus is at the right hand of the Father. In other words, seated with him. In other words, Jesus is calling himself God here. God doesn't share his throne with anybody.
Right.
Jesus is saying, I am God. And the right hand, remember we talked about action? So the right hand of God, we talk about, in your right hand or your forehead, the right hand of God. So that's our action. Jesus is the action of the Father, if you want to say it that way. He's at the right hand. He is the right hand of the Father. He is telling Caiaphas, I am God. I'm going to destroy you. And I'm about to go be seated on my throne. And Caiaphas, here's how you're going to know that's true. Because after I'm gone, my followers are going to tell the whole world about this. And you will see that I am going to be coming in the clouds of heaven. A reference to God's military might poured out on the earth. Remember all of our theming on clouds. Remember, the clouds is the basically the place of the God sits on the clouds of heaven as he brings his military might against an ungodly nation. We've gone over that lots of times. If nobody's heard that, you can just look that up. We've gone over that so many times. So you know how Caiaphas is going to know Jesus is at the right hand of the Father? Because he's going to see him coming in the clouds of heaven. In other words, all of my prophecies are going to become true, and you're going to see it. That's what's happening. Why would Jesus claim this to Caiaphas if Matthew 24 is in our future? He could only make that claim if Caiaphas was going to see it.
Right.
So
Makes
Caiaphas
sense.
saw the fulfillment of Matthew 24. And when he did, he knew that Jesus was the Son of Man from Daniel chapter 7. See how this all goes together? Okay. So in Revelation 14:14, John looked and behold a white cloud, purity, white cloud. And upon the cloud, no different than we've seen the rest of the Bible, here we see one like unto the Son of Man. So Son of Man coming with the clouds. So this is a reference to exactly what Jesus was talking about with Caiaphas. But now in John's vision, it's playing out. In the vision, it's playing out. So what we were looking at in Matthew 26 was AD 30. And now we're looking at closer to AD 66. As the Great Tribulation is beginning. And so here we see Jesus is sitting on the cloud, and on his head is a golden crown. In other words, Jimmy, he's been crowned king. You see, Caiaphas had to ask Jesus if he was king. But now his coronation has happened.
Yeah.
When was Jesus coronated? I have to ask our futurist friends this all the time, and those that are premillennial, I have to ask them, is Jesus king? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, do you freely confess that Satan is king? Folks, Jesus is king. His coronation happened at his ascension. And here we see that he has a golden crown on his head. Let me pause there for a moment and go to Jesus' message to his disciples after his resurrection. Look what he says in Matthew chapter 28 in verse 18. Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. No, I want to point out a very obvious thing here. It says that all power is given unto me. Given. That's a change. If you go backwards in the gospel and you go read the Matthew from the beginning, like we're doing at True Grace, verse by verse, you will notice that Jesus, time after time after time, says things like, I would have no power but from my Father. I wouldn't know this if it wasn't from my Father. He says things like, I don't work in my own authority, but the only authority is what my Father gave me. It's this kind of theming throughout his ministry. Then all of a sudden, Matthew 28:18, Jesus resurrects from the dead, and he goes and talks to his disciples. And you know what he tells them? First thing out of his mouth, all power is given unto me in heaven and on earth. Then begins our familiar Great Commission, go ye therefore. See, the therefore of verse 19 is based on the fact that Jesus was just given all power and authority, which he did not previously have. It's the same idea in Hebrews 1, that Jesus was made a little lower than the angels, but he became better than the angels. There's a progression in the ministry of Christ. So be careful of your Bible teachers that want to hit the pause button in the ministry of Christ. Be careful of that. The story progresses. Christ is coronated at his ascension, and he commissions the 12 apostles to explain the story to us. All right. So in this one section here in verses 14 through 16, we see a golden crown on his head. Now another angel comes and makes some comments. He says to a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Jesus, he says, thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap. Now, what is he reaping here? What he's reaping here is the harvest of the Jews, because this whole thing is about the culmination of the destruction of the old covenant. The temple being destroyed is the end of the old covenant. Remember, we talked about that kind of being a baton relay in AD 30 when Christ died and he instituted the new covenant in the upper room. It's kind of like a baton relay. One runner has the baton, the other runner kind of grabs onto it, and for a split second, they both have it, but soon one's going to let go and the other one takes it. That's kind of what we see in the book of Acts.
Yeah.
Jesus has instituted the new covenant, but there are elements and pieces of the old covenant still there. In his grace, he doesn't just do a hard break, but we see in his grace these elements, like we could still go to the temple on certain holy days and we could still try and make some kind of a temple appearance and do things we could do at the temple, but in a swift moment here. So here he's going to now reap. Basically, can I say it this way? We're going to find out who accepted the gospel in the book through the book of Acts. That's basically what we're talking about. So he that sat on the cloud, verse 16, he did that. He did just that. He wanted to see who the first fruits were. We're talking about a harvest. He's going to put in his sickle and he's going to see who the first fruits are. Now, that's what we're talking about in this passage. Remember the newspaper headline, verse number 1. I looked and I saw a lamb on Mount Zion with 144,000. Now let's tell you how we got there. So in verse number 16, we're seeing that idea of him reaping those 144,000, the first generation of Jews that are being reaped here, that are being saved out of the old covenant system into the adoption through the blood of Christ to God the Father. So he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. Now, when this is happening, he's obviously getting the first fruits to himself, and whatever's left over is in a heap of trouble. In a heap of trouble.
If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and check out the full episode by clicking the link below.